The most romantic married couple in movie history, Nick and Nora Charles, were in 6 Thin Man mysteries spanning 1934 through 1947. When we first meet them, they've already been married for more than 4 years, and they're not facing any crisis in their romance. Imagine pulling off 6 feature films about a couple that's wildly in love and never bickering or on the verge of divorce. On those merits alone, the Thin Man films surely have no parallel. A good friend of mine refers to the wife and I as the Nick and Nora Charles of Pomona, which in most ways is a compliment. Nora, played by the irresistible Myrna, is cool, adventurous, witty, and high class. Nick, played by William Powell, lacks Nora's sex appeal, but he makes up for it by being sly, funny, and creative. He's unfazed when threatened at gunpoint, and always impeccably dressed, unlike Nora, whose wardrobe seems to be mostly made up of an endless supply of bizarre nightgowns and cocky little hats. Nick knows almost everyone in the underbelly of society, mostly cheap hoods with cartoonish personalities who amuse his wife. She's inherited a fortune in lumber, railways, and other vague industries which Nick manages, having given up his work as a private detective. But Nora has this constant need to see her man in action like he used to, and thrills whenever there's danger. She's a tourist in the underworld.
I love you because you know such lovely people.
And he is cheekily crass in high society.
Don't worry, it isn't catching.
Walk this way, sir.
Well, I'll try.
Nicky, pull yourself together.
But they thrive in each other's company. Dry martinis and saucy banter fuel much of their chemistry.
What's that man doing in my drawers?
Oh, excuse me. This is Mr. Charles. I didn't catch your name.
Finn Haddon. Letty Finn Haddon.
Well, that's the fastest piece of work I ever saw in my life.
I can put on my art snob hat and firmly declare that the first installment is a truly good film. The cinematography ranges from film noir to German expressionism to rom-com. There's a long, tense sequence shot entirely by flashlight. None of that day for night nonsense. Watching the entire series back-to-back for this video brought out how the first film, shot allegedly in 2 weeks, is so much better than the sequels, which are still fun. The movies never change up Nick and Nora's proven power couple dynamic, so the producers mix things up by putting the couple into new settings to see how they fare. Sports betting, Cuban gangsters, a gambling ship, a bittersweet homecoming. They constantly get themselves into bizarre situations. Starting with a wild Christmas Eve party in the first film, they throw a holiday bash which is populated almost entirely by bizarre thugs that Nick had sent upstate at one point or another in his previous career. And as Nick boozily entertains his guests, suspects in his current case slip in and get tucked away in bathrooms and cupboards, like in a Restoration-era comedy. Then a desperate gangster breaks into the Charles' bedroom and threatens them at gunpoint, grazes Nick with a bullet, and is dragged off by the police.
I read where you were shot 5 times in the tabloids.
It's not true. He didn't come anywhere near my tabloids.
In the morning, we find Nick and Nora hungover, but bemused by their mutual gifts like children. Nick taking out balloons and ultimately a window with his new pop gun. It's just your average Christmas. That worked, so they end up in even more crazy situations in future films. A party exclusively for gangsters with babies, a lights-off brawl in an East Indies nightclub which ends with Nora finding a Latin Lothario who's been on her all night, mysteriously replaced by Nick, who's given the interloper a good shiner.
Oh, something hit me. Oh, that's too bad. Good night.
Good night.
Why, Nicky, I believe you care.
When the series does falter, as any series must, it's when it tries to domesticate Nick and Nora. Their son, for example, is rarely seen, and he's merely a plot point in the finale of Another Thin Man. Their dog Asta, wildly popular with audiences, was given a mate and a litter in movie 2, who are never seen again once that movie's over. Facing off with Nora's high-class family works, but meeting Nick's parents in The Thin Man Goes Home doesn't somehow. The movie abandons the novel's Greek immigrant origins for Nick and puts his parents in a California suburb. It never quite goes full fish out of water. The series is full of what would have been cameos if the actors had showed up in this later. Jimmy Stewart, Donna Reed, Maureen O'Sullivan of the Tarzan films, etc., Cesar Romero, Tor Johnson from Plan 9, Shemp from The Three Stooges, Ruth Hussey of The Philadelphia Story, and Dean Stockwell of Quantum Leap all show up. And though I can't prove it, I have a sneaking suspicion that the Goldfinger villain Oddjob might have been inspired by one of the thugs in After the Thin Man, a stout Asian who takes out an opponent by whirling his bowler hat into the man's head, which is bizarre 25 years before Goldfinger was ever written, and a titillating maybe for Bond fans. The final film, Song of the Thin Man, tries to capture the zany jazz age, but ends up making Nick and Nora look a little square, and the film's writers, too.
Solid.
Frequent Disney villain Keenan Wynn, the son of Ed, makes a completely unbelievable Hepcat.
Tune in, man. I'm talking about that broken down, under the stars jazz.
But 13 years and 6 films is a long time to keep going for most series. Back when we began, novel Nick and Nora were 41 and 28, pretty close to Powell and Loy's actual ages. Loy was no longer now the ingenue of the barbarian or the sadistic vamp of the Mask of Fu Manchu. She was now the mom of the best years of our lives, and soon cheaper by the dozen. Powell had 3 Oscar nominations under his belt, and he should have won for My Man Godfrey. Sorry, I can't give Best Actor to Powell in 1934 over Clark Gable in It Happened One Night. But in any other year, Only the first movie is based on the One Thin Man novel by Dashiell Hammett, although the third film takes elements from a non-Nick and Nora Hammett short story. Most of the dialogue stays pretty faithful to the book, but it's given real sparks thanks to the performances of Powell and Loy, both of whom seem to be having the time of their lives. The novel is lightweight for Dashiell Hammett, but it would be hard for any novel to get as grimy and pessimistic as The Maltese Falcon. Nick uses his wits and nerve to work out the solution of a murder, 3 of the 6 films working out a crime by the angle of a hole in a wall or a ceiling or a victim. The first 2 films have very well put together stories, but even then, these are not tightly wound mysteries. Any suspect might have done it. I guess the ending of a couple of them, since the Thin Man falls mostly into the Scooby-Doo trap. The nicest, most sympathetic character did it.
Hank! Oh, dag-nabbit!
And turns into a reckless, cackling fiend once they're found out.
I got sick and tired of plain Little Red Riding Hood to that old guy. So when Phil was fooling around trying to get money out of him, I found we spoke the same language.
The mystery comedy classic Clue nailed the frequent immateriality of whodunits by giving audiences in different showings of the film 3 different conclusions, each of which is explained with equal sureness and fits the previous sequence of events. The mystery is just a framework on which to hang colorful characters, dialogue, and comic vignettes.
Da-da-da-da-da. I am your singing telegram.
Which of course makes sense, since in the board game, the killer and their methods are picked completely at random. The Thin Man series is a long way from the puzzle solving which most people associate with the mystery genre. For me, that's a bonus. I don't come to wrestle with some game of logic, because personally, I dislike games on the whole. These films gifted us with a unique pair of characters unencumbered by will they, won't they, or manufactured romantic crises. Roger Ebert compared them once to the Astaire and Rogers films, just with dialogue in place of dancing. And while I have quibbles with that assessment, he's definitely right about the incredible lightness of being Nick and Nora. They're just 2 very fun people living a fabulous, wealthy, carefree life, except that somebody's usually trying to kill them.